Arnie and I grew up in Ellenville, New York, a small town in the Catskill Mountains. We never expected to leave it, but in 1970, both our freshman year in college, my parents had a U-Haul truck in our driveway in Ellenville, and they were moving south to Florida. And suddenly, after 18 years or 19 years in this wonderful community, we lost it. I dropped out of college after my freshman year, and for several years, I traveled here and there, living an alternative lifestyle, having all types of odd jobs, working as a chauffeur, working as a gardener, as I searched for what my passion was. And after several years of really having a lot of adventure, Ron and I decided to journey to Vermont. And that was in the late 70s, like 77, 78, where we were hoping to find a place to sink our roots. Prior to landing in the Montpelier area, Arnie and I traveled extensively in the United States, and one of our trips, probably 1973, 1974, we traveled into California and found ourselves in the agricultural valleys, and we were astonished to see all of the pesticide spraying. But what could we do about it? And we carried that question, what could we do about it, into Vermont. We always imagined that the people who were going to do something about it were people who were established in business, who had money, who had connections. The idea for Earth's Best for organic baby food actually occurred in 1976, just a year before we landed in Vermont. But Arnie and I both thought that we didn't have the credentials. We both had dropped out of school. We knew very little about baby food except who was supposed to eat it. And we just waited and expected someone else to do it. In the meantime, we were sprout growers. I worked in group homes with children who were wards of the state of Vermont. I started a tool business where I was restoring primitive hand tools and folk instruments. And that led to brew making. You know, the theme here is that Ron and I really weren't looking for jobs. We had entrepreneurial blood. It was in our DNA. And that took us into some pretty strange places, like Mom and Dad were going into the broom making business. We're going to make early 19th century shaker style brooms. Not what they had in mind for their twin boys. They had doctor, lawyer, something recognizable, but that was a crafts business that worked well until I became allergic to the broom corn. And suddenly my broom making life was cut short, and Arnie carried on, and I found myself headed for the Ronald McDonald House in Burlington, Vermont with my wife, Carly, and it was an opportunity to be the first co-directors of that house and work with children. Arnie and I still were talking about organic baby food. This is 8 years after the first inspiration for it occurred. Which was Ron's inspiration. Thank you for that recognition, Arnie. Okay. And so 1976, 1984, 8 years, no one else was doing baby food, organic baby food. I was at the Ronald McDonald House with Carly and our first son, Gabe, who became and is the first Earth's Best baby because I experimented on him quite extensively with my early product development work. And Arnie was still making brooms when, in 1984, Arnie decided... A sunny September morning. I think September 14th, 1984. I have to take a look at the book. It was a Sunday. It was a Sunday. Anyway, Arnie drove into the Ronald McDonald House in his red broom cornmobile van, and he said to me, he said, "Ron, I'm doing the baby food company with you or without you. It's time. No one else has done it. We've waited long enough. Why not us?"
Well, I think that they had talked to a number of people at the Champlain Mill and said, we've got this great idea, this great vision, and we need some help. They came in to see me more than once. I didn't say yes the first time they'd come in. I wanted to know their vision and their plan, and probably suggested they go to see someone else that knew more about the business than I did, at least the direction that they wanted to go. They sold me on the idea with their enthusiasm, with their stick-to-itiveness, with them telling me that they believed in this so much that they were going to do it anyway. They didn't know how they were going to get the money, but they were going to get it somehow. They didn't know how long it was going to take them to be successful, but they were going to be successful. The passion is what led me to help them. I thought that the passion was so great that I agreed to sign a promissory note with the Chittenden Bank with them, so that if they defaulted, then I would step in and pay the bank off. And so I thought that they needed to have a real interest in this, and not just me. Although if they went away, then I would be the only one with the interest. But I thought that they were honest and sincere enough that they would try their best to make this payment.
I was at the University of Vermont working on my master's degree in nutrition. I was finishing up my thesis work. I was in the process of having to look for a job. And Ron in particular had been working for quite some time already with one of the professors who I knew there, named Levon Bartel. And she knew that Ron was looking for somebody who would help with quality control work in their upstart baby food company. She knew I was looking for a job, so she introduced the two of us. We hit it off right away. I mean, I just totally fell in love with his mission and what he was hoping to accomplish. I had 2 little children myself, so I knew the challenges of trying to feed healthy food to babies. My dad was, at the time, a professor at the University of New Hampshire teaching entrepreneurship, so I totally understood the challenges that Ron and Arnie would be facing, and I thought this would be like a really exciting opportunity to kind of live what my dad has been teaching everybody and what I always heard in the background when I was, at home with him.
When I came back to Vermont in 1972, I became very interested to be part of, creating small businesses in Vermont. And so I did that for a number of years, including Shelburne Spinners, Free Mountain Toys, Pack and Ship. And then Ron and Arnie came along, gosh, it was the mid-'80s, and suggested to friends that they were interested to start this business up. And I raised my hand with enthusiasm and said, yeah, I'd love to be a part of that. And interviews, and then, a core team became a part of the beginning of Earth's Best.
Organic was certainly on my radar screen, but it was more from the perspective of how pesticides, synthetic fertilizers, and that sort of thing may come into play with someone's health in that they are eating the foods that were sprayed with these items. So the thought that we can now take the concept of organic and put it together with baby food, it seemed to me like that would be the ultimate nutritious food for a baby, and it seemed definitely a vision that was worth pursuing.
The first days of Earth's Best were extremely confusing. It was obvious that it was quite an iterative, intuitive process that was unfolding, and I went into that business thinking I was going to be involved with production because I had a production background, and there was just so much confusion in the beginning. So many issues were coming up so constantly that it was very, very hard to be organized on a day-to-day basis. Starting up with production was very exciting because we were starting something very new. I'm a very organized person, so to be in that environment was really hard for me. But I could see that the twins were so deeply interested in trying to achieve this vision that you just absolutely wanted to be a part of supporting them.
Everything was still in this setup stages. And when they put us to work, we were doing things like cleaning the floor and cleaning walls and cleaning equipment as it came in, because some of it came in pretty rough shape. We would try to work with the mechanic to get the equipment running. It just continued for weeks like that. Finally, we were ready to make our first batch, and we were going to make apple juice. We had a special machine that was supposed to press the apples and give us apple juice, and it did not work. We tried over and over to get it to work. We spent many production days trying to get it to work, a lot of frustration, and in the end, we found out that it wasn't meant to press apples. And so we gave up on the apple juice, and we went to applesauce. And we had problems with the cooker. The steam lines had been connected with some sort of compound, and it gave the applesauce an off taste. So we dumped batches of that until the problem got resolved. They put in, I think, steam filters, and they also bled out the whole steam system. And we finally got a good batch of applesauce.
The apple line, which was, it must have been the fruit line, mostly apple-based products, was, 8 or so products. And so that was our first chapter of like putting that product out into the world. So once we got the fruit line down, it meant that we could start to expand into dinners and products that were more diverse in their ingredients, and that would be chapter 2. And that's when I got involved in the product development and expanded that product line into different kinds of blends, including dinner blends. And that's when we were really starting to hum, because we had become familiar with suppliers, we were getting familiar with suppliers, and that was just an extremely exciting and vital time for the company, where we were establishing new sources of supply and multiple sources of supply, which was getting us to feel a sense of security.
When I moved from being a clerical person to being a buyer of the raw materials that went into the company, it was the most exciting thing that ever happened to me, because I could visit, and they gave me a chance to visit all kinds of farmers and to look for farmers who had been conventional, who wanted to go organic, and who were in the larger agricultural world, and yet they were compelled and interested by this idea and by this little company, and it took big chances, and it was really exciting for me.
They were undercapitalized from the beginning, and when I became involved, they were seeking bridge financing to enable them to restart production. My recollection is they had ceased production in February or March of '88 due to lack of cash. So I worked with them and helped advise them through various bridge financing possibilities, and they were able to raise a certain amount of bridge financing at various points.
The morale at Earth's Best was sort of like taking a roller coaster ride. I mean, initially you have this great sense of anticipation. This is going to be a really exciting ride, and so the company starts up, and everybody's energized by the idea that they're there at the inception, and they have this great new product that hasn't been done before. And of course, then the realities of this company sets in, the challenges, and I know there were so many challenges that I wasn't even privy to, as far as the financing of the company and the engineering of the production floor and the marketing of the product. And I was very naive when it came to how you go about marketing and getting your baby food on the shelf. I just figured you went to the grocery store and said, put this in with other baby food. Well, that's not how it works. So I think as the company moved on, these challenges, they just started building up and building up. You've frequently lost your hope, you've frequently lost your enthusiasm, and then, of course, it was probably midwinter of the first year, things got so bad, financially I believe it was, that they actually had to let most all of us go. And of course, that was probably one of the most demoralizing times. But we got called back, which was great. And so, we were back on the upswing again. And I think the morale, on a day-to-day, maybe week-to-week, month-to-month basis went up or down. But there was definitely a very common, solid, ongoing sense of hope and optimism in spite of all of that. I don't know if that was just something that I thought was there, if it really was there, if Ron and Arnie just made sure we thought it was there. But I think they believed so strongly in what they were doing that, in spite of all those obstacles, we managed to sort of hold on to that, if we just hang in there, maybe we're going to come out the other side.
It was a large challenge, big challenge, because nobody knew what organic was. At this point, organic had reached the natural food stores. And we quickly saturated that market and clearly had to get into grocery.
The idea of going from the natural foods industry into the mass channel of distribution was a no-no. That was a betrayal. We understood that, but we knew that there was no possibility of survival if we were to play by the rules. We had to change the rules. We had to get the price point down. We were going to do anything and everything to protect our baby, Earth's Best.
Gaining distribution in grocery is a very difficult proposition for a startup company. And that's because it's the most prized real estate in the United States. And it's dominated by all the large brands. And so they dominate all the shelf space at eye level. And if you're lucky, you find a place somewhere on the bottom shelf or the top shelf. And usually you got to pay to play. Earth's Best reached out to some professionals who knew that turf. Wherever we did get in, we had to justify our existence on the shelf.
Months after we started production, we were in financial distress. We were at the point where making payroll was becoming questionable. The first investors in put together another round, a little bit of working capital to keep us going, and it became evident that that maybe the only place for us to get the type of capital we needed was in the venture world. Ron and I didn't know anything about venture capital. We had heard rumors about people calling it vulture capital, but Ron and I never had the orientation of putting a group of people into a box and saying, oh, they have to be vultures. Maybe there were vultures but I'm sure there were good people too. That led us to introducing ourselves to local venture capital groups. And over many months and interviews and discussions, we got to a place where we were going to have a $6+ million closing of a venture capital round, which sounds like a lot of money. And it was, but it was not nearly enough. But there was a surprise. Ron and I were invited to an emergency board meeting, and I knew on the board were several of the early round investors, some of the angel investors, some of the local business people that had gotten behind the company. This was a mostly collegial group of people. We got along, and Ron and I really weren't expecting anything, other than they must have something really on their minds that's important. That's why they're basically calling us to Burlington. We thought maybe the $6 million of venture money was about to close and there were some last minute decisions to make, but we had control of the company. The original structure of our board was such that Arnie and I had a 60% controlling interest of the company, and we had sold 40% of the interest in the company to the first round of investors, and the board was structured so that we could call the shots. And we needed that control. So, but we also needed this $6 million of capital to be infused into the company. So that kind of sets the stage for the moment.
Their description of Earth's Best was basically that we were trying to launch a rocket into space, and we would always just get enough fuel to reach sort of the atmosphere, and then we'd be on our way back down to Earth. We never were properly capitalized from the start.
I think one thing to bear in mind is they were really very early on the curve in terms of obtaining angel capital financing. The financing markets in terms of angel capital had not really developed to the extent they have today. So they were sort of creating blazing new trails and learning sort of as they went along, which was really inevitable back in the late 1980s.
We drove to Burlington. We walked into the meeting. All of the board members were assembled along with the venture capitalist that was looking to bring $6 million of new cash into the company. And right then and there, Ron and I were given an ultimatum. They appreciated all that we had accomplished, but decided that we really didn't have the capability to take the company forward, and that I had to step down as president, or the venture capital would not come into the company. So it was a moment where we were shocked, we felt violated, and we were faced with a decision. The decision to probably put the company out of business, or to change the ownership structure and the management structure, and have me step away as president. You know, in so many ways, that sounds like a difficult decision, but Ron and I were never going to be the people to put Earth's Best out of business. We wanted Earth's Best to live on. Earth's Best was never about us. We made the decision. We didn't make it in that meeting. We made it soon after. I would step down as president. The venture round would close. They would bring in their own chief executive officer. I would become the executive vice president of grower operations. And the new guy, Paul is his name, he had it out for me from day one. I was managing the production. I was central to quality control in terms of interfacing with the people that were responsible for quality control. And for some reason, he just had it out for me. And maybe because I was outspoken, I'm not really sure why, but he hired a new production manager. Suddenly I couldn't write a check for more than $100. Suddenly I was out of the reporting loops for quality control, and it was very painful. And that's the bitter part of our story. To lose control of Earth's Best was very difficult, and so it was a very dark time, but it would become lighter. When that $6 million came in, that new money, Ron and I, we lost control of the company. We no longer had 60%. Our percentage was well below 50%. And so the new board was some of the original investors and the venture capital. I was no longer on the new board. The venture capital was, there were 2 or 3 venture capitalists on the board. So the complexion of the board changed. I was still a board member, but I no longer had the controlling vote.
They lost control of the company, which is the more common than not outcome of any entrepreneur raising outside capital, ranging from angel to venture capital. Particularly if you need multiple rounds of financing, the entrepreneurs are going to end up owning less than 50% of the company. They may retain their role in the company. They may retain the CEO role, or their role may change to Chief Operating Officer, Chief Technology Officer, or some other role in the company. But the more rounds of outside capital a company takes in, the more likely the entrepreneur is going to be perceived as not ready to take the company, to the next level in terms of growth and sales. So it's the rare entrepreneur that is still the CEO after multiple rounds of financing. And if there's a hiccup in the company's growth, usually the entrepreneur is shown the door, and the investors bring in new management.
They could have approached us differently. They could have related to us. They could have cared about us and said, guys, you know what? You've done so much. We love what you've done. We love what Earth's Best is becoming, but we don't think that you've got enough management or enough financial strength or ability, and we really need to talk about bringing in someone else. They could have done that. I really was out of the company 3 or 4 months after that. They didn't renew my contract, and I knew that it was the right thing for me because I couldn't steer from the back seat.
Ron left the company, and many of us were very upset. And we had a different manager then because Ron had been managing us. And we felt that there was a need to be extremely aware of the quality. We didn't want that to drop. And there were a few times when we went to the new manager and said, we really don't think this is okay.
For as long as I was doing Earth's Best, I gave it everything, and I knew it was a part of my life that I would never forget, and that I knew I would use it and build on it because I lived in that environment the way I want to be in this world, and I'm very proud of it and grateful for the experience. Right, and conversely, while Ron was being pushed out, I was being offered more money, more stock options. The new money realized that they needed at least one founder in the company involved to give them that credibility. Ron and I agreed from the very beginning that we would never be divided, that whatever they offered me, if it was more than what he would be getting, I would split it with him. There was never a way that anyone would drive a wedge between us, and that was the way, it went. We went forward. Is that I was still there, but even though I was a board member, even though I was still doing my job, the more venture capital money that came into the company, the more distant my role became, because I was no longer as important. They were weaning themselves of the founders. It was obviously a very sad day when Ron had his going away party.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, I was there, and in some ways, I wish we could have had that party together. But I stayed with the company, and I continued to try to work with the management and fight for the Earth's Best standards. But by the summer, somewhere in the summer of 1990, not that long after Ron left, I was at the point where I could no longer accept the way I was being related to. I was not being included in high-level meetings where big decisions were being made. As a board member, I was not always present when I should have been present. There were meetings that went on that I was unaware of. And as hard as I tried to find a way to collaborate with the new management and the new money, I ended up feeling used. I'd had enough, and I resigned. But I kept my position as a board member. Not too long after that, I decided I could no longer stay on the board, and I was gone. But between 1993 and 1995, Ron and I played the role of consultants. And then there was a very big event. In 1996, Earth's Best was sold to H.J. Heinz for $30 million or so.
I think Ron and Arnie, to me, kind of personify the whole concept of vision/mission and sticking to it despite the obstacles that are put in your way. And I think they were in it because they really had something that they wanted to do, and I think money was so secondary to them that that's why they were willing to sort of stick it out when, if they were just in it for the money, they would have probably, thrown their hands up and walked away a long, long time ago. So, for me, if everything, the going gets tough, you can always look to Ron and Arnie and say, whoa, these guys really, they did it.
Ron and Arnie really inspired us. And we felt like we were part of something very, very important. And I think we were.
Our goal was to make the best baby food in the world. And we believed in that goal. We strived to achieve that goal, and we didn't want any little bit to get by that wasn't the best. And I think in that respect, we all became family.
Ron and I did not get stuck in bitterness. What we started out to do, going back to 1984, was we wanted to start the first organic baby food company in the United States and change the food paradigm and bring organic foods into the mainstream. And that dream became a reality. The idea that millions of babies have been raised on Earth's Best and parents have had the choice, a choice they never had until Earth's Best, is part of a dream come true. The idea that thousands of acres of farmland that may have been farmed conventionally are then being farmed organically was a big deal. Ron and I had the type of success that millions of dollars don't necessarily buy. And our success is the success of knowing that we helped spark an organic revolution, and we helped create an environment that made it possible for many other entrepreneurs to show up on the scene and bring new products to the market and expand it. And that is very, very satisfying.